When people talk about the greatest guitarists of all time, the same names always come up: Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Eddie Van Halen. But here's the truth. Those legends didn't create rock's golden sound all by themselves. Behind the headlines and magazine covers were other players, equally daring, equally brilliant, who rewired the DNA of rock music without ever getting the same credit. Some were overshadowed by louder frontmen, some were swallowed by changing trends, and some simply never cared about fame at all. But their riffs, tones, and innovations shaped the music we still listen to today. Imagine the sound of glam rock without Mick Ronson. Imagine Rush without Alex Lifeson, or Fleetwood Mac without Peter Green. These aren't just side players. They were architects of entire genres. In this countdown, we're uncovering 10 underrated guitarists who truly changed rock forever. From soulful blues masters to prog rock pioneers. These are the names you might not hear in the spotlight, but without them, rock history would sound very different. So plug in, turn the volume up, and let's give these forgotten heroes the recognition they deserve. Number 10, Mick Ronson.
Lots of other reasons to keep me here.
Every movement in rock has its secret weapon, and for glam rock, that weapon was Mick Ronson. While David Bowie commanded the stage in glitter and theatrics, it was Ronson's guitar that gave the Ziggy Stardust era its muscle, bite, and beauty. He wasn't just a sideman. He was the backbone of Bowie's most iconic sound. Ronson's playing struck a perfect balance between grit and elegance. On tracks like Moonage Daydream, his searing solos elevated Bowie's cosmic visions from art rock experiments to anthems that filled arenas. His Les Paul tone was thick and aggressive, but he always left space for melody. Critics often said Ronson made the guitar sing, and it's true, his leads had the drama of a voice crying out. But what makes Ronson truly underrated is that his influence stretched far beyond Bowie.
I can't find a reason or rhyme.
He went on to work with Lou Reed on Transformer, adding texture and firepower to classics like Satellite of Love. He later collaborated with Ian Hunter of Mott the Hoople, helping shape the sound of British rock at a time when it was evolving from glam to punk. Ronson was everywhere, but rarely in the spotlight. Many musicians who followed in his footsteps admitted they borrowed from him. His combination of showmanship and discipline became a blueprint for guitarists who wanted to blend flash with substance. Without Ronson, the glam movement might have leaned too heavily on style. He gave it the raw rock credibility it needed. Sadly, Mick Ronson never fully received the recognition he deserved during his lifetime. Overshadowed by Bowie's stardom, his name was too often left out of the conversation about great guitarists. But for those who know, his playing is unforgettable, proof that sometimes the unsung heroes are the ones shaping the sound most of all. Ronson may not be mentioned as often as Hendrix or Clapton, but his fingerprints are all over rock history. And in a way, that's fitting. True innovators don't always crave the spotlight, they just want to make the music roar. Number 9, Rory Gallagher.
You're in my sights. There's a mist on my lips.
If there was ever a guitarist who lived and breathed rock and roll without compromise, it was Rory Gallagher. Gallagher's weapon of choice was a battered 1961 Fender Stratocaster, stripped of its finish from years of sweat and relentless touring. On songs like Bullfrog Blues and A Million Miles Away, he played with a ferocity that seemed to channel the spirit of old Delta bluesmen, yet with the volume and aggression of modern rock. Clapton once called him one of the greatest guitarists he had ever heard. Brian May said Gallagher was the reason he picked up the guitar in the first place. What set Rory apart wasn't just speed or technical precision, though he had both in spades. It was his honesty. Every note he played came from the gut. Whether he was ripping through a 12-bar blues or sliding into a soulful solo, there was never any pretense. He wasn't performing for the crowd, he was performing with them. Drenched in sweat, living every word he sang and every riff he played. Despite selling millions of records and building a die-hard fan base across Europe, Gallagher refused to compromise his music for commercial gain. When record executives suggested polishing his sound or adding trendy backing vocals, he walked away. He'd rather play a tiny club in Cork than chase a hit on the Billboard charts. That defiance may have kept him from superstardom, but it made him a legend among musicians and fans who valued authenticity above all. Even today, his legacy looms large. Players from Slash to The Edge cite him as an inspiration. His live performances remain the stuff of legend, immortalized in recordings like Irish Tour 74, where every track crackles with energy. To hear Rory Gallagher was to feel rock at its most primal, most human. He may never have reached the commercial peaks of his peers, but Rory Gallagher changed rock by proving you didn't need glitter, ego, or radio singles to matter. All you needed was a guitar, an amp, and the courage to play like your life depended on it. Number 8. Steve Howe. Progressive rock in the early 70s was known for its ambition, its sprawling arrangements, and its musicianship. At the heart of that movement stood Steve Howe of Yes, a guitarist who managed to make complexity feel effortless and experimentation feel natural. While bands like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple pushed rock toward heaviness, Howe pushed it toward sophistication. Howe wasn't content to just crank up the distortion and shred. He brought in elements from classical, jazz, and folk, weaving them seamlessly into rock music. On tracks like Roundabout and Starship Trooper, his playing was as intricate as it was powerful. His ability to shift from delicate acoustic passages to roaring electric solos in a single song made him one of the most versatile players of his era. What truly set Howe apart was his imagination. He wasn't trying to sound like anyone else, and that originality bled into Yes's groundbreaking albums. Listen to Close to the Edge or Fragile, and you'll hear guitar parts that don't just support the music, they define it. His solos were less about showing off and more about telling stories, giving each song an emotional arc beyond the lyrics. Other guitarists noticed. Howe's style inspired players in prog and beyond to expand their palettes, to see the guitar as more than just a tool for riffs and solos. Even Eddie Van Halen once cited Howe's versatility as an influence, showing how deeply his reach extended across genres. Yet, despite all this, Steve Howe often gets left out of conversations about the greatest guitarists of all time. Perhaps it's because prog rock has always been a little niche, or because Yes never had the cultural spotlight of the Stones or the Who. But in terms of pure skill and creativity, Howe stands shoulder to shoulder with the giants. For prog fans, Steve Howe is the master craftsman who elevated the guitar into something almost symphonic. And for rock history, he's the reminder that true innovation doesn't always come from the loudest players. Sometimes it comes from the most imaginative. Number 7. Terry Kath.
Same old show in a different town on another time.
Before Chicago became known for smooth horns and soft rock ballads, they were a fierce, experimental rock band. And at the center of it all was Terry Kath. He wasn't just the guitarist. He was the band's driving force, its soul, and its secret weapon. While later eras of Chicago leaned into radio-friendly pop, Kath's guitar gave their early years a grit and power that rivaled any of the heavier bands of the time. Jimi Hendrix himself once remarked that Terry Kath was better than me. That wasn't just flattery, it was recognition of a guitarist who blended raw blues passion with fearless innovation. On songs like 25 or 6-4 and South California Purples, Kath's solos burned with intensity, balancing technical skill with emotional fire. His use of feedback, wah, and sustain showed a player who wasn't afraid to push his instrument into uncharted territory. But Kath wasn't only about flash. He could pivot from a heavy, distorted riff to delicate, jazzy chords without missing a beat. That versatility gave Chicago a sound that was hard to pin down. Part rock, part jazz, part blues, part psychedelic. Without Kath's restless creativity, the band may never have stood out in the crowded late 60s and early 70s scene.
But I've got my job to do, and I do it well.
His stage presence matched his playing. Fans who saw Chicago live in the early days often walked away, stunned not just by the horns and harmonies, but by Kath's ability to dominate the stage with sheer energy. He played like every show might be his last, pouring himself into every note. Tragically, his career was cut short in 1978 when Kath accidentally shot himself at just 31 years old. It was a devastating loss for the music world. Many believe that had he lived, Kath would be spoken of in the same breath as Page, Clapton, and Hendrix. Instead, he remains one of rock's greatest what-if stories. Terry Kath may not have lived long enough to get the recognition he deserved, but his playing lives on in Chicago's early records, and in the respect of the legends who knew just how powerful he was. Number 6. Frank Marino.
Lived inside of a magical dream.
When people talk about the birth of shredding and high-speed guitar heroics, names like Eddie Van Halen or Randy Rhoads usually dominate the conversation. But long before either hit the stage, Frank Marino was already tearing up fretboards with a style that blended blues, psychedelia, and sheer speed. Leading his band Mahogany Rush, Marino carved out a space as one of the most explosive yet underrated guitarists of the 1970s. At first glance, critics dismissed Marino as a Hendrix imitator. His tone, phrasing, and even stage presence carried clear echoes of Jimi. But listen closer to tracks like Dragonfly or Talkin' 'Bout a Feelin', and you'll hear a player pushing beyond homage into new territory. Where Hendrix leaned on raw emotion and psychedelic flair, Marino added a precision and intensity that foreshadowed the metal shredders of the next decade. His solos often stretched into wild improvisations, mixing blues bends with rapid-fire runs that felt almost superhuman. He could unleash flurries of notes at lightning speed, then pull back into soulful phrasing that reminded you he was rooted in the blues. That duality, technical firepower and emotional depth, made him a guitarist's guitarist, even if mainstream audiences never quite caught on.
Dreams of life.
Marino's influence might not have been obvious to the casual listener, but guitarists were paying attention. Many future shredders, from Yngwie Malmsteen to Paul Gilbert, cited his playing as part of the DNA of the genre. His use of sustain, feedback, and speed techniques made him a bridge between Hendrix's revolution and the metal guitar heroes who followed. Despite his talent, Marino never broke through to household name status. Part of it was timing. Mahogany Rush existed in an era overflowing with guitar giants. Part of it was his refusal to chase commercial trends, preferring instead to follow his own path. That independence kept him under the radar, but also preserved his authenticity. Today, Frank Marino stands as one of the great missing links in rock guitar history. Without him, the leap from blues rock improvisation to full-blown metal shredding might have taken much longer. He may not have gotten the fame, but his fingerprints are all over the sound of the guitar gods who came after. Number 5, Peter Green. Before Fleetwood Mac became a pop rock powerhouse with Rumors, the band was built on the blues. And at the heart of that original sound was Peter Green, a guitarist whose tone and touch were so soulful that even legends like B.B. King stood in awe. King once said, "He has the sweetest tone I ever heard. He was the only one who gave me the cold sweats." That's how much respect Green commanded. Green founded Fleetwood Mac in 1967 after stepping into Eric Clapton's shoes in John Mayall's Blues Breakers. No small feat, considering Clapton was already being hailed as God at the time. But Green didn't just hold his own. He carved his own path. His playing on songs like Albatross, Oh Well, and Black Magic Woman, later made famous by Santana, showcased his unique gift for combining technical brilliance with haunting emotion. What set Green apart wasn't flashy speed or wild showmanship. It was restraint. He knew how to say more with fewer notes, letting every bend and sustain carry weight. On Albatross, he created a dreamy, almost ambient blues sound that was unlike anything else of its time. On Oh Well, he proved he could be raw and aggressive, foreshadowing hard rock. His ability to shift moods so effortlessly made him a master storyteller through his guitar. Yet, despite his brilliance, Green's career was tragically cut short. Struggles with mental health and heavy LSD use forced him out of Fleetwood Mac by the early 1970s. While the band went on to global fame with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, Green became a forgotten figure, a man whose genius was overshadowed by his decline. For musicians, though, Green never disappeared. His peers, Clapton, Santana, Gary Moore, all hailed him as one of the finest players of his generation. Gary Moore even dedicated an entire album, Blues for Greenie, to his mentor. His influence stretched far into rock and blues, inspiring countless players to value feel over flash. Peter Green may not have stayed in the spotlight, but his legacy remains monumental. He proved that sometimes the most powerful guitar playing isn't about pyrotechnics. It's about honesty, restraint, and emotion so deep it leaves you breathless. Number 4. Robin Trower.
We were listening down a rainbow.
When people first heard Robin Trower, many thought they were listening to Jimi Hendrix reborn. His tone, his phrasing, and his use of effects all carried echoes of Hendrix. But calling Trower a copycat misses the point entirely. What he did was take Hendrix's psychedelic blues foundation and carve out his own distinct voice, one that gave the 1970s some of its most atmospheric and soulful guitar work. Trower first gained attention as a member of Procol Harum, but it was his solo career that cemented his reputation. His 1974 album, Bridge of Sighs, remains a masterpiece, filled with moody, expansive tracks that showcased his ability to blend heaviness with haunting melody. The title track, with its swirling, hypnotic guitar lines, is often cited as one of the greatest psychedelic blues recordings of all time. What made Trower stand out was his command of tone. He could make a Stratocaster sound like it was weeping, soaring, or screaming, sometimes all in the same solo. Songs like Two Rolling Stoned and Day of the Eagle proved he wasn't just channeling Hendrix. He was evolving the language of blues rock into something new, darker, and more spacious. Trower's live performances were equally legendary. Without relying on theatrics, he created an immersive soundscape that seemed to transport audiences somewhere else entirely. Fans would describe his shows as almost spiritual experiences, with the guitar itself acting as the preacher. Despite his immense talent, Robin Trower never achieved the same level of mainstream fame as other guitar heroes of the 70s. He preferred to stay in his lane, crafting music that resonated deeply with his fans, rather than chasing radio singles or flashy trends. That independence may have kept him out of the spotlight, but it also preserved his authenticity. To this day, Trower is celebrated as one of rock's most expressive and atmospheric guitarists. He carried the Hendrix torch without being consumed by it, proving that true innovation often comes from reimagining the foundations left by those before you. Number 3. Steve Hackett.
The wall of death is lowered in Times Square.
Progressive rock has always been about pushing boundaries, and few guitarists embodied that spirit better than Steve Hackett of Genesis. Joining the band in 1971, Hackett helped define their most ambitious era, layering complex guitar textures into albums that blurred the lines between rock, classical, and the avant-garde. Hackett's genius lay in his innovation. Long before Eddie Van Halen made two-hand tapping famous, Hackett was experimenting with it on songs like The Return of the Giant Hogweed and Dancing with the Moonlit Night. His use of tapping, sweep picking, and volume swells expanded what rock guitar could sound like, giving Genesis a sonic edge that set them apart from their prog contemporaries. But Hackett wasn't just a technician, he was a painter. On Firth of Fifth, his soaring solo remains one of prog rock's most iconic moments, full of emotion and precision. He could shift from delicate acoustic passages to fiery electric leads, often within the same song, adding layers of depth that made Genesis's music so immersive. Though Genesis eventually moved toward pop after Hackett's departure, his contributions remain the foundation of their prog legacy. Bands like Marillion, Dream Theater, and countless prog metal groups owe part of their sound to Hackett's groundbreaking techniques. Steve Hackett may not be a household name, but his fingerprints are everywhere in modern guitar playing. He proved that rock guitar didn't just have to roar. It could whisper, cry, and transport listeners into entirely new worlds. Number 2. Alex Lifeson. When you think of Rush, most people immediately think of Geddy Lee's soaring vocals and bass, or Neil Peart's legendary drumming. But Alex Lifeson was the glue that held it all together. The underrated genius whose guitar work gave Rush their balance of power, precision, and atmosphere. Without him, Rush would never have sounded as groundbreaking as they did. Lifeson had a rare ability to adapt. In the early 70s, he delivered crushing riffs on songs like Working Man and Finding My Way, giving Rush their hard rock edge. As the band evolved into prog epics like 2001-12 and Xanadu, Lifeson expanded his palette, layering intricate arpeggios, spacey textures, and searing solos that matched Pert's complex rhythms and Lee's adventurous bass lines. By the 80s, when synthesizers began to dominate Rush's sound, Lifeson reinvented himself again, creating shimmering guitar landscapes on tracks like The Spirit of Radio and Tom Sawyer. His ability to weave melody and power without ever overplaying made him one of the most versatile guitarists in rock. Despite his brilliance, Lifeson has often been overshadowed by his bandmates. While Pert was hailed as one of the greatest drummers ever and Lee became an icon for bassists, Lifeson quietly built one of the most innovative guitar catalogs in rock history. Musicians recognized it. From Metallica to Dream Theater, countless players cite Lifeson as an influence. But mainstream fans rarely put him in the same league as Page or Clapton. Alex Lifeson's legacy is clear. He proved that the guitar doesn't always need to dominate the spotlight to change the game. Sometimes its greatest role is as the thread that ties everything together. And in Rush, Lifeson did that better than almost anyone. Number 1, Gary Moore.
I found out that love is more than just a game.
Few guitarists could move so effortlessly between raw power and heartbreaking emotion as Gary Moore. Known for his work with Thin Lizzy and a prolific solo career, Moore was the kind of player who could tear the roof off with a blistering hard rock riff, then silence a crowd with a single sustained note that seemed to cry out from his very soul. In songs like Parisian Walkways and Still Got the Blues, Moore showcased a mastery of feel that rivaled even the greats. His vibrato, bends, and phrasing gave every solo a human voice, one that spoke of pain, joy, and everything in between. Unlike many shredders of his era, Moore wasn't interested in showing off for its own sake. His speed was impressive, but it was always in service of emotion. Moore's versatility was another mark of his genius. He could thrash through heavy rock and metal with Thin Lizzy, dive deep into the blues on his solo records, and even experiment with jazz fusion in projects like Coliseum 2. That ability to cross genres while still sounding distinctly Gary Moore made him one of the most dynamic guitarists of his generation. Yet, despite his incredible talent, Moore never quite achieved the global superstar status of contemporaries like Clapton or Page. Part of it was timing. Part of it was his restless need to reinvent himself. But among musicians, he was revered. Legends from B.B. King to George Harrison sang his praises, and countless guitarists cite him as a direct influence on their playing. Gary Moore's legacy is simple but powerful. He proved that true greatness lies in the ability to make people feel. Whether it was a fiery rock anthem or a slow blues ballad, his guitar spoke straight to the heart, and for that, he remains one of rock's most underrated giants. And there you have it. 10 guitarists who may not always make the magazine covers or greatest of all time lists, but without them, rock would sound completely different. From Mick Ronson's glam firepower to Gary Moore's soul-stirring blues, these players shaped the DNA of rock in ways that often went unnoticed by the mainstream. What connects them isn't just skill, it's courage. Each one of these guitarists dared to carve their own path, whether it was Steve Howe bending prog into symphonies, Alex Lifeson redefining what it meant to be the glue in a legendary trio, or Rory Gallagher pouring raw honesty into every note. They weren't chasing fame or following trends. They were chasing truth through music. Decades later, their influence still rings out. You hear it in stadiums, in bedroom jam sessions, and in the countless guitarists who picked up their instruments because of these underrated heroes. They may not have had the spotlight, but they lit the way for generations of musicians who followed. So now it's your turn. Who do you think deserves more recognition? Which underrated guitarist changed the way you hear rock? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this debate is far from over. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into rock's unsung heroes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Because we've got plenty more stories about the legends you know, and the legends you should know. Because in the end, greatness isn't about fame. It's about the music that stands the test of time,